Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Hatman Strikes Back, Daily Boxing News. We got some stuff to talk about this evening. But before we get into that, shout out to everybody in the live chat. We got Supersized Fries, Charlene, Warts, JR, Kieran, Gifter, Stephen, Costas, Mike. Big up, big up. Yeah, big up Warts. He says, perfect timing, was just heading out for a run. JR says, makes you wonder now about the dodgy decision in Franklin's last fight. Was it just to preserve his O for this? Well, Franklin doesn't have an O, of course. He was beaten by Anthony Joshua and by Dillian Whyte. And in truth, yeah, indeed, he got a dodgy decision against Ivan Ditchko. That should have been another loss. But I think what you meant to say was to preserve Franklin's unbeaten run since those two losses to Dillian Whyte and Anthony Joshua. And I suspect that was the case because that was one of the worst decisions I've seen in a long time, Jermaine Franklin against Ivan Ditchko. It was clear to me that Ditchko won that fight. I mean, he was dominating it. Yeah, Franklin managed to come back a little bit in the later rounds, but not enough to get a decision. And not only did Franklin get a decision in that fight, but he got a decision wide. It was crazy. But we'll come on to that. Shout to Stereo Boxing Broadcast. Shout to Mark. So this was the poster, as you guys can see, which was put out to announce this fight. Itauma versus Jermaine Franklin, the Magnificent 7 card. Chief support, Willie Hutchinson versus Ezra Taylor. There's a bunch of other fights on there, such as, if you have a look at the BoxRec page here, Liam Davis versus Zach Miller, Shaquille Thompson versus Brad Pauls, Nathan Heaney versus Jerome Warburton. Like the bread, right? Warburton's bread. He must be from up north somewhere, I'm guessing. Now, aside from the card being, I guess, a fairly solid domestic type card, you had the, now I want to call it good news, not because we should be grateful and be applauding DAZN for this, because this is what they should be doing. This should be standard procedure. But they're not putting this one on pay-per-view. Thank the boxing gods. They confirmed it in the comment section for the Itauma Franklin poster. As you can see here, it says this event will be included as part of the DAZN subscription. Obviously, Itauma's last fight was a pay-per-view against Dillian Whyte. It shouldn't have been a pay-per-view against the washed-up former title challenger. It should have been part of the DAZN subscription as well. But at least we're getting that for Itauma's next fight against Jermaine Franklin. Now, there are going to be people, and I've seen them already, complaining about Jermaine Franklin as an opponent for Itauma. I really don't understand that because Itauma is 13-0. If we get Itauma's record up here, 1 second. Where are we at? Well, Itauma versus Franklin on BoxRec. Itauma's 13-0. He's not quite 21. I don't think he hasn't turned 21 yet, so I'm not sure why BoxRec have put his age as 21. Maybe they're just doing that in advance of him being 21 when he fights Franklin in January. But this will be his 14th fight. And there are a lot of casuals out there who are acting like Itauma's supposed to be fighting for world titles next, or fighting the most dangerous contenders next. They say that if he's the new Mike Tyson, then that's what he should be doing. Well, hang on a second, and I've explained this before. Who is Mike Tyson fighting in his 14th fight? You think he was fighting killers? This is the guy that Mike Tyson fought when he was 13-0, so his 14th pro bout. Slamming Sammy Scaff. Some redneck guy coming off back-to-back defeats. 13-6-0. Okay, absolutely useless. Here he is, slamming Sammy Scaff from Ashland, Kentucky, right? And anyone who is an aficionado of Mike Tyson's career will have seen this fight and will know just how useless Sammy Scaff was. No disrespect to the man, but if we're talking about boxing here, heavyweight boxing, Scaff was not even remotely close to world level. If we compare him to British fighters, he wouldn't even be a British title level, truth be told, today, Sammy Scaff. And that is who Mike Tyson fought in his 14th fight. So if Mike Tyson is able to fight the Sammy Scaffs of the world when he's 13-0, then why on earth shouldn't Moses Itauma be fighting the likes of Jermaine Franklin? In fact, I'm going to say that Jermaine Franklin is a lot better than Sammy Scaff. So there's a lot of people out there that are either ignorant about who Mike Tyson, Lennox Lewis, and people like that were fighting 13-0 in. So yeah, there's certainly a bunch of ignorant people, but there's also people who know exactly who Mike Tyson was fighting, but because they're such big fanboys, they maybe exaggerate how good or understate how bad the likes of Sammy Scaff was. So I think it's a perfectly reasonable fight for Itauma to be taken at this stage of his career. Jermaine Franklin, I think that it's a good yardstick. It's a good opponent to measure Itauma's progress against, because Jermaine Franklin, in my opinion anyway, from what I've seen of him, he's not shot. He's not in the same kind of shape, or he wasn't against Ditchko anyway, that he was in when he fought Anthony Joshua and Dillian Whyte. But he's not a guy that's taken a load of hellacious beatings. He's never been stopped. So he's relatively fresh at the age of 32. A lot fresher than Dillian Whyte was, I'll tell you that, when Dillian Whyte fought Itauma. So I think it will be a good yardstick to see where Itauma's at relative to an aging Dillian Whyte a couple years ago and an aging Anthony Joshua, who went on from that Franklin fight to knock out Robert Helenius, to stop. Who else did he stop now? He knocked out Robert Helenius, stopped Otto Wallen, knocked out Francis Ngannou, of course. So, like I say, I think it's a good measuring stick. We'll see what Itauma can do with Jermaine Franklin. And for me, Jermaine Franklin was definitely in the shortlist, or on the shortlist, of the 5 most ideal opponents for Itauma to be fighting next in order to get him rounds, in order to advance him as a fighter, as part of his development process. Yeah? The number 1 for me would have been Filip Hergovic. That would have been the most ideal opponent for Itauma next. But Hergovic, for whatever reason, was unavailable. And so, yeah, Itauma's got to be top 5, maybe even top 3 on my list, for ideal opponents for Itauma next, in terms of getting him rounds without being overly dangerous. Don't get it twisted. Hergovic would have been way more dangerous than Franklin in my estimation. Franklin defensively is relatively good. He's not that easy to tag with clean shots. And when he does get hit with clean shots, he's got a good chin. He comes to give it a go. His weakness really is offensively. He's not very creative offensively. He's not that formidable offensively. He hasn't proven himself to be a serious puncher. He hit Anthony Joshua on the chin, never hurt him. He did buzz Dillian Whyte a little bit, but bear in mind, this is a Dillian Whyte whose chin has been absolutely finished for years. Okay? So that's Jermaine Franklin. I think it's a perfectly reasonable fight for this stage of Itauma's career. But what say you? We'll throw it over to the live chat and see what you guys think. All right, we've got a super chat in from Craig. Big up Craig. He says, why do you think Big Meat JK Anthony Joshua, or who do you think, will be facing next? I've heard it's on an 8-rounder on an Inoue undercard. Yeah, that's the talk at the moment, and I don't have an issue with that. If AJ were to fight on an undercard against whoever in an 8-rounder, it's something which fighters used to do commonly back in the 80s and 90s. I'm talking about great fighters. If this is Anthony Joshua's last attempt to challenge for a world title, and he wants to just get a little rust shaker in an 8-rounder before going into a big fight in the early part of next year or the first half of next year, no issue with it. The word on the grapevine is, like I say, he'll be fighting or might be fighting in an 8-rounder in December, or on the anyway card, as you say, and then going into the Luke Partridge fight in the first half of 2026. And Partridge apparently is looking to do the same thing, to take a little tune-up against the nobody and then go into that big meech fight, Anthony Joshua. So yeah, I wouldn't have an issue with either of them taking a little 8-rounder or whatever. Because in that type of fight, you know, you wouldn't expect either guy to take damage unless it's to their hands. So it shouldn't jeopardize a fight against each other, hopefully. Big up Craig for the super chat. The one way says Franklin's got no KO power. Yeah, and I think that's part of the reason they're putting Itauma in with him. It's gradual, incremental steps. Tony Yes says, big up Jermaine Franklin for actually taking the fight. Big up Liam Goff, aka G-Man in the chat. Big up, big up. Afro Jam says, Franklin broke or busted up AJ's nose. Yes, he did. But he never actually hurt him. He bloodied his nose quite early in the fight, but I seem to remember people saying that AJ's nose was actually bleeding on the way to the ring, which is very strange. And therefore, the idea is that Jermaine Franklin just exacerbated an already existing bloody nose. Steven says he needs rounds. He does indeed. And if Itauma can go in there and blitz a guy like Franklin, I'm sorry people, that's a statement. Again, not like Franklin is some special fighter, he's obviously not. But if Itauma was able to go in there and do a job on him, nah folks, that would be a statement. He would show that he's, in my view, levels above, or potentially levels above, the AJ and the Dylan White of a couple of years ago. We know he's levels above Dylan White now, he just blasted him out in a round. But I'm talking about a couple of years ago. Big up Matt for the super chat. He says, I'm really still not sold on Itauma yet. I'm just waiting for that bad style for him. Not enough amateur experience to have seen it all like an Usyk. Matt says, Hatman, it is not a statement Jermaine Franklin is washed. I disagree. I haven't seen anything to suggest that Jermaine Franklin is washed. He hasn't been knocked out. He hasn't been beaten up. He's only 32 years of age. What would make you think he's washed? This is not Erickson Lubin. You know, Lubin had been stopped a bunch of times, and Lubin always had a weak chin. Jermaine Franklin's got a very solid chin. Now, Jermaine Franklin has never been very good. We can say that. You know, this is not a guy that's some offensive genius, but he's defensively quite capable. Again, solid chin, knows how to look after himself in the ring. He's not going to be presenting a load of sophisticated artillery for Itauma to deal with. He's there to make him work for a KO if he manages to get it, and take him the rounds. Matt says, what do you mean he didn't look like he didn't even try to be in shape? Yeah, but not being in shape is different than being washed. You could be in your prime and not be in shape, right? So I think, you know, if Itauma stops Franklin, if he stops him, it's a statement. It's a statement, because nobody's come close to stopping Jermaine Franklin. Again, this is not a guy who's been dropped. This is not a guy who's been noticeably out on his feet or seriously hurt. This is not a guy who's been in a bunch of wars. This is a relatively fresh 32-year-old Jermaine Franklin, who's coming off 3 wins on the spin. So yeah, for me, it's a statement if Itauma gets him out of there. And although you're right about Itauma's lack of amateur experience, he only had 20-something fights. His experience really is in sparring sessions since he was like 13, 14 years old with top professionals, because that is just not normal. It's not a regular, normal thing for a schoolboy to be getting drafted in to the training camps of top professional heavyweights and used as a serious sparring partner. That is not normal. And so it tells us something about him already, that he was being used in that way. It tells us that he's not intimidated. It tells us that there is a maturity as a fighter way beyond his years. Now, obviously, sparring is different than doing it in a pro fight with the little 10-ounce gloves on and no headgear. But I think Itauma is very, very promising. And I can't tell you how great, if he goes on to be great at all. I'm not going to sit here and tell you he's going to turn out to be one of the greatest heavyweights of all time. But I am confident enough already to predict that Itauma is going to become a world champion. I would actually be very surprised if Itauma doesn't become a world champion. I think the potential is just too overwhelming. And when I look at the heavyweight landscape moving forward, the potential is just too overwhelming in my view, in my estimation, for him to not become a world champion at some point. So I fully expect him to become world champion. Matt says that can also mean there is a major issue with the current heavyweight landscape for a 15-year-old to compete at top level as well. I'm not sold. Well, it could mean that, or maybe he's just that good. Do you know what I mean? And at the end of the day, even if it is a damning indictment of the current heavyweight landscape, that's who he's going to be competing against. He's not going to be competing against Mike Tyson, a prime Mike Tyson, is he? He's not going to be competing against Lennox Lewis, as in fighting these guys. He's not going to be fighting a prime Lewis or a prime Tyson or a prime Holyfield or a prime Ali. No. He's going to be fighting the current crop of fighters or the next generation of fighters. So even if you say that it's not a very good generation, the fact he's doing so well against them behind closed doors in the gym, in my view, is an indication of how well he's going to do when he fights them for real, you know? So I think Itauma is the most promising heavyweight prospect that has come along in years. I think he's very, very promising. There's a ton of potential there. Obviously, he's got to go in there and deliver on the potential. But big up Matt for the super chat. Malik says if Moses stopped Franklin, that would be a huge statement because White and AJ's power punches had no effect on Franklin's chin whatsoever. His chin is very solid, so we'll see. That's what I'm saying. I'm not expecting Jermaine Franklin to really offer much offensively. He's not that sophisticated offensively. He's pretty rudimentary, but it's his durability and his defensive capabilities and the fact he's able to take people rounds and frustrate people a little bit by being awkward that will maybe ask some questions of Itauma. And if Itauma's able to go in there and just blast him out, seriously, that's a statement. Because as you say, AJ's punches and White's punches couldn't have that effect on Franklin. Ivan Ditchko, who's a good puncher, his shots didn't have that effect on Franklin. So if Itauma goes in there and pieces him up in a couple rounds and puts him over for the first time in his career, for example, I'll be very impressed. Well, people are talking about the Dillian Whyte fight. For me, Itauma, if he were to stop Franklin, would tell us way more than stopping Dillian Whyte. Dillian Whyte was absolutely shot to bits. His chin has been shot for years, can't take a shot. And maybe he lost far too much weight in a short space of time, which also further weakened him. Dillian Whyte was a war-weary veteran. Jermaine Franklin is not that. He's a lot fresher than Dillian Whyte. Charlene says, if Franklin orthodox or southpaw, he's orthodox. He's an orthodox fighter. Now, in the midst of all this, let me try and get the thumbnail up here. One second, folks. Yeah, here we go. So Frank Warren did an interview with Box Nation regarding the announcement of this fight, which is now official. It's on BoxRec and everything. And Frank Warren said that the plan, and this is the first time he's revealed it, the plan for Itauma next year is to give him a minimum, this is what Frank Warren said, a minimum of 4 fights, culminating in a challenge for the world heavyweight title. He didn't say whether it would be the regular version versus Kubrat Pulev or a legitimate version, but he did kind of allude to Alexander Usyk maybe vacating or being stripped, etc. But he said that's the plan, to get Itauma out a minimum of 4 times, starting with the Franklin fight in January, and by the end of the year, have him challenge for the world heavyweight title. Now, someone there in the chat said, or kind of suggested that Itauma's not ready for Usyk. Well, I completely agree with that. I don't think Itauma's anywhere near ready for Usyk. But is Usyk still going to be champion? Is Usyk still going to have all of the belts by the time Itauma's ready to challenge for world honors? We shall see. Big up Tommy for the super chat. He says, oh, excuse me. Big up Matt. He said, if he stops Hergovic, I'll be sold. Should be now. Unfortunately, Hergovic was unavailable to fight Itauma. Apparently that fight was explored. Frank Warren promotes Hergovic, and Frank Warren was choosing his words carefully, but he seemed to hint that Hergovic turned the fight down. To be fair, Hergovic was cut very badly in his last fight against David Adeleye, so it would make sense that he's not available in December or January to fight Itauma. So yeah, that would have been a much more dangerous fight for Itauma for sure, because Hergovic is a lot more offensively capable than Jermaine Franklin. He's not just there to absorb punishment, he can dole out plenty of punishment himself. So I agree, that would be a far more significant win, without a shadow of a doubt. Big up Matt for the super chat. Big up Tommy for the super chat. No comment on that one. Matt says, big up Matt, he says, Hergovic struggled against a very washed Joyce and almost got stopped by Adeleye, a regional boxer. I thought that Hergovic beat Joyce quite comfortably, to be honest. Yeah, Joyce was in his face and made him work, but I didn't think that fight was that close on the scorecards, in my personal opinion. I thought Hergovic won that pretty comfortable. I think the optics of the fight maybe threw people off a little bit because Joyce was by far the aggressor. But if you actually watch who's landing what, Joyce didn't land many clean shots in that 10-rounder at all. Hergovic landed loads. He was leaning back and punching off the ropes and hitting Joyce with 1-2s and what have you. So for me, that was a pretty clear points win for Hergovic, but Joyce is still a physical specimen, and he's going to push you back and he's going to force you to fight him off. Now, Hergovic didn't do to Joyce what Zhang did. Hergovic doesn't have that kind of power. And that's the thing about Hergovic. People have said this before. He's a guy that thinks he's a puncher, but he's actually not. He fights like he's a massive puncher, should I say, but he's actually not. Yeah, and against Adeleye, he won virtually every round. He had a rough patch, what was it, in the 8th? But other than that, he won every round against Adeleye. Yeah, he got cut, but that didn't seem to bother him that much. And he totally outworked. I mean, what were the scorecards for that fight? It was wide, right? scored a knockdown as well. So yeah, he did come for a rough moment against Adelaide for sure, but Adelaide can punch, you know. Big up Matt for the super chat. Tony S says, what do you think of the American heavyweight Joshua Edwards who fought in the Ortiz-Lubin card? I actually thought he was British when I first heard the name. I think I might have had a look at him, but I need to have another look at him to remind myself of who he is, because you guys suggest a lot of fighters for me to look at. I looked at another American heavyweight prospect a week or so ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, and I actually did a Patreon film study about him. I forget his name now, but he's pretty much trash, all right? I was surprised that someone thought I would rate him. To me, he looks trash at the moment. I forget the guy's name. He looks Cape Verdean to me. I don't know whether he actually is, but he looks Cape Verdean. You know, people from Cape Verde have got a particular look. Big up Bam, big up Mateo for the super chat. He says, Jalalov lacks the gas tank and turns timid when hit. You might be onto something there. And is that why Jalalov has been hiding away in the amateurs for so long? Because it's really been frustrating me that he hasn't been taking his professional career as seriously as his amateur career, which has been running concurrent to his pro career for the past couple years. I think Jalalov's got a ton of physical potential, but as you say, seems to lack the gas tank and turns timid when hit. His last fight was very revealing, wasn't it? Big up Ben Oldham, much appreciated for the super chat. No comment on that one, but always good to see you in attendance. And as I say, much appreciated, my bro. If you do want me to read out a comment, just drop one in the live chat. Big up Tommy Gov for the super chat. He says, in Eddie Hearn's recent Instagram post, he said Turkey winked at him when Eubank Sr. showed up at the Junior versus Conor Benn fight. Suggest he was paid. Yeah, I remember this. In the run-up to that first fight, Eddie Hearn was insinuating that Eubank Sr. was getting paid to attend. And to be honest with you, I wouldn't be surprised if that was actually the case. I think Eubank Sr. is that cynical. Do you know what I mean? I think his behavior is that cynical. It wouldn't at all surprise me if he was paid. I can't say he definitely was, but yeah, it wouldn't surprise me. Thank you, Tony. Yes, yeah. Damazion Van Houten. That's the guy I looked at. I did a video on Patreon about him, a film study where I went through some of his fights. And to me, he looks trash right now. He looks trash. He needs years of work. I'm talking about years. Years and years of work before he'll even be, I want to say, British title level. He's not a British fighter, but just to try and compare him, right? To give you an idea of where I think he's at right now. I think that guy's not far off Johnny Fisher, to be honest with you, in terms of his development as a heavyweight. I don't think he's far off a Johnny Fisher level right now. I think he needs years of development. Maybe he's got a higher ceiling than Johnny Fisher. I'll probably say that. But in terms of where he's at right now, I don't think he's far off a Fisher level. He's certainly nowhere near Itauma. I mean, not even close. Big up Tommy Gov for the super chat every time. Much appreciated, sir. Big up KO Kid Boxing. Four Fox says, Van Houten is a 154 fighter fighting at heavyweight. Don't see him going anywhere. Yeah, he was 154, I think, less than 2 years ago. And now he's like a 215-pound heavyweight. To be fair, he's only 20. So when he was at 154, he was 18, I guess. It is a bizarre weight jump in a very short space of time, but maybe it can happen, you know, with a growth spurt in your late teens, right? How tall was he when he was 154? Because now I think he's only about 6'1", 6'2". So if he was maybe 5'10", 5'11", 2 years ago, it's possible to get a growth spurt in your late teens like that. So it does happen to some people. There were certain people I went to school with who were short all the way through school. And then in their late teens, they had a massive growth spurt, and they ended up like 6'4". You know what I mean? Like in school, they were tiny compared to me. And then somehow I see them, you know, 3, 4, 5 years after school, and they're towering over me. Big up, guys, for the super chat. He says, more chance of the upset, Kingba or Franklin? Definitely the former. I don't really think Franklin has got much of a chance against Moses Itauma, to be honest. I think, in my mind, it would be a massive upset if if Franklin were to beat Moses Itauma. That'd be a massive upset to me personally. I'm not expecting that to happen at all. Again, Franklin is very resilient, but offensively, he's very limited. Mr. Lucas says, how did Hergovic struggle with Joyce exactly? He won every round against Adalai. I mean, he totally dominated Adalai, apart from that one moment late in the fight. Against Joyce, it was more competitive because Joyce is very physical, and he was able to push Hergovic back and really force him to throw a lot of shots. But in terms of punches landed, I thought Hergovic won it quite comfortably. It wasn't necessarily a comfortable fight from a physical perspective, as I say, because Joyce is so strong and bullish. But yeah, for me, there was no question that Hergovic was the clear winner. But maybe Matt thinks that Hergovic should have done, if Hergovic was like a real force at world level, he should have done a similar job he should have done a similar job to Joyce that, let's say, Zheli Zhang did, and he didn't. But, and I understand that argument, but at the same time, Muhammad Ali wasn't doing the same job to Joe Frazier and Ken Norton that George Foreman was doing, you know? Styles make fights. Mateo says Jalalov has a fight on November 14th in Uzbek versus some joker I've never heard of, to be honest. That's disappointing. Because when you think about the level of competition Jalalov's been fighting in the amateurs, he needs to be moving a lot quicker. Especially when you look at his age, right? The guy is in his early 30s now. A two-time Olympic gold medalist. He was an elite and a dominant super heavyweight in the amateurs for years. The guy needs to get a move on. No BS fights, no little, you know, random Eastern European journeyman and all this kind of thing. He needs to be in there with recognizable contenders now. He's got to get a move on. He's no spring chicken. He needs to be striking while the iron is hot, but maybe he just doesn't have it psychologically. We'll see. I hope he does, because he's got a ton of potential there, and he's got that amateur pedigree. Danny says, Zhang's left is as powerful punch as I've seen. And his right hook is pretty damn powerful as well, right? The right hook that knocked out Joyce in the rematch. That was a tremendous shot. Big Bang got power in both hands. Big up Jake, I'm doing very well, sir. How are you doing? The one way says, could be like another Fraser Clark, all the hype from the amateurs, but a big flop. I hope not. The thing with Jalalov is that the talent is a lot more apparent when watching him than looking at a Fraser Clark. Fraser Clark is like a big, strong guy who doesn't have a lot of natural talent, who's just worked hard on his technique and grinded away in the gym, you know, polishing his basics to a level where he was able to succeed in the amateurs. With Jalalov, he's way more athletic than Fraser Clark, way more athletic. Hits a lot harder, and he's just far more dynamic. So, as I say, the talent jumps out at you with Jalalov. It certainly doesn't with Fraser Clark, at least not to me. So it would be, to me, more jarring if Jalalov didn't have success in the pros than Fraser Clark not having world-level success in the pros. Afro Jam says, other than Melikuziev, none of the Uzbeks have the grit. I quite like Melikuziev. I quite like him. It was one of the most random knockouts I've seen when he got chinned by Rosado. And that was the best punch I've ever seen Rosado land in his whole career, by the way. When he knocked out Melikuziev. That was crazy. I have never seen Gabe Rosado land a better right hand than that in his whole career. I've watched him for years. Obviously, Melikuziev got his get back in the rematch. But yeah, that was so random. Melikuziev got chinned by Gabe Rosado. Anyone else see that fight? What a right hand. Star Fox says the only Prime Fraser had was Amazon Prime is crazy. Who made that comment? Star Fox says, evening all, did I miss the Moses talk? Yes, you missed the Moses talk, but we can still talk about him if you wish. It's been announced, it's official. He's fighting Jermaine Franklin in January 24th to be precise. And it will not be pay-per-view, that card, thankfully. Big up everyone in the live chat. Great to have you guys on board. If you can all stick a like on the stream, it will be much appreciated. It really helps by way of visibility in the YouTube algorithm. So if you guys can stick a like on it, I'd really appreciate it. Four Fox says Rosado should have retired after that. Shout out to Matt for the super chat. He says, the craziest thing I've seen was watching Top Rank's Alan Garcia get knocked out brutally by a 15-13-1 Mexican journeyman. There's been so many bizarre knockouts over the years, you know, like out of the blue, out of nowhere, upset victories. But big up Matt for the super chat. I'm not sure I saw Alan Garcia get knocked out by the Mexican journeyman. When was that? Danny says, still not sold on Itauma, too many questions to be answered. Well, it depends what you mean by sold on. Because I'm not saying, or I'm not yet convinced that Itauma is going to go on to be a great. But personally, and I could be wrong here, I am convinced that Itauma is going to win a world title at some point. I'm already convinced of that. That's a good shout, Danny, actually. He says, what about Munguia recently by that feather-fisted Canadian? Was he Canadian or French? Was he not actually from France, or was he a French Canadian? I forget the guy's name. Obviously, Munguia won the rematch, but then he tested positive for something, didn't he? And then was very quickly cleared, quote unquote. of any wrongdoing, apparently. But that's a good shout. That was random as hell. That was very random, Danny. That was so random because the guy didn't have a puncher's record or anything. And Itauma, if nothing else, has shown himself to be very tough over the years. A good chin. And that French guy, with like no power, with no suggestion of power in his record, went out there and like damn near knocked Munguia out cold with one punch. That was very, very random. Very random. A big up Matt, he says that French guy turned out to be very good. Bruno Sarash, thank you, 4Fox. That's the guy's name, yeah. Matt Borgerson says, Papa almost KO'd the hell out of my boy Liam Parrow. Tommy Gubb says, Hatman, what do you think of the undercard for this fight? I think it's okay. It's not a great undercard, it's okay. But it is part of the DAZN subscription. That's confirmed by DAZN themselves. It will not be a pay-per-view event, and nor should it be. This was DAZN commenting on the poster of this announcement. This event will be included as part of the DAZN subscription. So, no issues there. The One Way says, Hatman, what is it with Liam Smith and his hate for Eubank? I get it, they were rivals, but guy does more interviews about Eubank than his own career. Maybe he just doesn't like the way Eubank comes across, you know, the arrogance, the pompousness, is that even a word? Comes across as pompous and arrogant. And the fact that maybe he doesn't feel like he was 100% in their rematch, and Eubank managed to get the best of him when he felt like he went 100%, you know? Maybe that just eats at him a little bit. Yeah, maybe you're looking for a trilogy as well, says Chris Ward Music. Could well be. Because that's a big payday, right? Indeed, money. Yeah, that's a big payday. Eubank is a money man, whether people like it or not. Jake Isaac says, Hatman, have you ever heard of the company Palantir with their long-term goals being predictive policing using AI and surveillance? Not to mention their insidious connection with JD Vance. Yes, I know all about Palantir, JD Vance, so on and so forth. And what you've just outlined there kind of reminds me of the movie with Tom Cruise, Minority Report. Any of you guys seen Minority Report? That's an underrated movie. Was that directed by Steven Spielberg? That must have come out close to 20 years ago, Minority Report. Or maybe, yeah, maybe close to 20 years ago. 16, 17 years ago or something. Deb Yarka says it's pomposity. Okay, there you go. Rather than pompousness. Pomposity. Star Fox says Liam has KFC salt in the wounds Eubank gave him. Jay Kaiser says yes, it was released in 2004. There you go. So more than 20 years ago. Time flies. Shows how old I am, bro. It's a good film. Debiarka says I made a killing on Palantir this year. Okay. Oh wow, Jake Isaac says actually 2002. Jesus, time has flown, it really has. The One Way says, Hatman, can we talk about Buatsi and how much of a letdown he's been and how long his journey has been carried out with seeing him age? Yeah, I spoke about Buatsi a couple of streams back and in my post-fight video for the recent bout he had, the most recent fight. which for me, he got a gift in. And I'm going to concur with what a lot of other people are saying, which is that Virgil Hunter is no good for him. I think Joshua Buatsi is a laid-back character. Virgil Hunter is a laid-back character. Joshua Buatsi needs someone to light a fire underneath him, and Virgil Hunter's not the guy to do that. Virgil Hunter's getting him to be far too technical. Now, there were some people who were saying this right from the beginning. As soon as that link-up happened, before they'd even had a fight together, there were some people saying this ain't gonna work. I was more circumspect. I was saying, let's just give it time and see. It doesn't seem like the most compatible union between fighter and trainer, but sometimes these things can surprise you. So I wanted to give it a couple fights before coming to a conclusion, but there were other people right from day one that were saying, yeah, Virgil Hunter with Buatsi, that's not gonna work. And they were absolutely proven right, in my opinion. And here's the thing about Joshua Buatsi. He really does blow hot and cold. If you think about it, at least in my opinion, Zach Parker is a slightly less talented version of Willie Hutchinson. I think Willie Hutchinson is better than Zach Parker, just my opinion. And Joshua Buatsi beat Hutchinson quite convincingly. It was a competitive fight, and Hutchinson had his moments, but ultimately Buatsi won that fight and nobody was complaining about the decision. Whereas against Zach Parker, Buatsi just wasn't at the races at all, you know? And he got outboxed, in my view, by a guy, as I say, who I think is not quite as good as Willie Hutchinson. So for me, that shows deterioration. Was Buatsi ever that good to begin with? Perhaps not, but I think he would have been more effective if he had a trainer that was teaching him to be far more offensive rather than to try and think too much. He's just thinking too much and not throwing enough punches. And I suggested in my post-fight video that he hook up with a trainer who I don't often recommend, right? Well, I think it'd be worth Joshua Buatsi trialing with Tony Sims. Yeah, because Tony Sims, the work he does with people like Conor Benn and various others, he gets you to throw in combination and let your damn hands go. Joshua Buatsi, as we know, is physically tough. He can take a shot, yeah? So he doesn't need to be overly cautious. It's not like he's got a glass chin to protect. You know what I mean? So let your damn hands go. Danny says, is it the trainer or the fighter? I think it's a combination of both. I think Buatsi does have shortcomings, right? I think that's going to be the case no matter who trains him. The One Way says, every time I see Virgil, he's in the losing corner. Now, to be fair, one link-up which I thought worked well was Virgil Hunter and Amir Khan. I thought those two actually worked really well together. I think that Khan produced some of his best performances under Virgil Hunter. Most notably when he beat Louis Collazo. I thought the way he beat Collazo was impressive. And also Devin Alexander. Those two fights were under Virgil Hunter. Yeah, and I think Virgil Hunter added structure to Amir Khan's game. Because prior to that, Khan was very chaotic in the way that he would fight, and that's why he would get caught with random shots and get hurt and dropped. Virgil Hunter had him fighting in a much more formulaic way, and I think that's what Khan needed. He needed that kind of structure. So I think the Virgil Hunter-Amir Khan link-up worked very well. Obviously, it's still Amir Khan, do you know what I mean? And he had a glass jaw, so there's only so much Virgil Hunter could do, but I think he did a pretty good job with what he had. Big up James Clifford for the super chat. He says, on the plane to Spain, not quite a night flight, taking off soon, have a great week, and everyone in the stream, and go for your goals and dreams. Big up James Clifford, always positive. That's why I like my bro James Clifford. Always coming with the positive vibes, Much appreciated, sir. All the best to you and yours. Have a safe flight. Enjoy yourself. Oh, wow. Rusby says pompousness and pomposity are both correct. Okay, I wasn't sure if pompousness was an actual word when I used it. But apparently, according to Rusby, both words are real and can be used. So there you go. Pompousness or pomposity. Shout out to Rusby doing the little dictionary check. Afro Jam says calm was all hand speed and with a hamster wheel in the brain. Shot says, I'm very unimpressed with Itauma versus Franklin. It would serve him right if Franklin beat him. So I'm going to kind of repeat what I said earlier on in the stream. I have no problem with the fight at all. Itauma's 13-0. Who should he be fighting in his 14th fight? Do you know who Mike Tyson fought in his 14th fight? Because I can assure you it wasn't anyone better than Jermaine Franklin. So I'm not quite sure why anyone would be so unimpressed and disappointed with Franklin for Itauma's 14th fight. It's the kind of guy he should be fighting at this stage of his career, truth be told. Danny says, Hatman, why do you never recommend fighters to Rob McCracken? Do you not rate him? Not really. Not really. One of the reasons is because I watched Rob McCracken as a fighter, when he was fighting at middleweight himself. And I never liked his style, and I can see a lot of his style in the fighters he trains. I could see a lot of his style in AJ, for example. McCracken was a very upright, robotic boxer. That's how he fought. All right, one sec, peeps. I'll be back in just a moment. Hold tight. Okay, back in full effect. Let's get back to these comments here. Danny said, I think McCracken had AJ right. AJ doesn't have the intangibles to be fighting slick. I disagree. Not that AJ is ever going to be or could ever be a slickster, but I think AJ wasted his best years with McCracken. So AJ did his best work under McCracken because that's when he was in his physical and psychological prime. But I think that he was far too stiff. I think he was far too rudimentary. A trainer who had more experience with heavyweights, I think would have been a lot better for him. In fact, I'm gonna concur with what, I forget who it was now. Was it Ade Oladipo or somebody else that said that Robert Garcia might have been the ideal guy for AJ. Yeah, because they look at that rematch he had with Usyk, and a lot of people, retrospectively, when they look at that fight now, think, you know what? He actually did better than we remember him doing against Usyk in that rematch. I still think Usyk won comfortably, but yeah, I think Robert Garcia might have been the guy. He might have been the guy. And even the work that AJ did with, what's the Spanish guy who he was training with as part of his team? He loosened AJ up a little bit. Pause. And if you look at the Povetkin fight, right, this is the way I would read the Povetkin fight. AJ was fighting the McCracken way in the first couple of rounds. And in the first couple of rounds, he was getting hurt. And he was getting hit often, fighting the McCracken way. Then he switched it up after the second round. Thank you, Debyaka. And he started fighting the Angel Fernandez way. And when he fought the Angel Fernandez way, he was able to draw Povetkin's sting. He stopped getting hit with big shots, and then he walked Fernandez onto, he walked Povetkin onto shots and knocked him out. He also fought, in my estimation anyway, the Fernandez way in that Andy Ruiz rematch, because he was working with Fernandez for that fight. Rob McCracken was with him too, yes. But he was also working with Fernandez, yeah, like behind the scenes and unofficially, as I understand it. And so for me, that was another Fernandez type performance where AJ was moving around the ring. He was never going to be a slickster, but he was more fluid than the way Rob McCracken had him fighting. Yeah, loosened up does sound crazy. That's why I had to say pause. Danny says, I always liked AJ with Robert Garcia. He had him again with a tight guard marching forward. Robert Garcia got done dirty after the Usyk rematch. He did have AJ marching forward with a tight guard, yes. That's the way Robert Garcia fighters tend to fight. But Robert Garcia fighters are not all out attacking volume punchers. Robert Garcia fighters walk forward with a tight guard and they pick their punches very carefully and they counter on the front foot. They use their jab very strategically and what have you. That's how Robert Garcia fighters tend to be. His brother Mikey Garcia fought like that. Virgil Ortiz fights like that. And various other Robert Garcia fighters fight that way. Yeah, they apply pressure, but they're not volume punchers. Yeah, they're kind of calculated, clever pressure fighters. Whereas with Rob McCracken, it was all too basic with AJ, you know? There wasn't the kind of nuance to his pressure, in my opinion anyway, that you get with a Robert Garcia. Tony S says, AJ was doing shoulder rolls and stuff versus Povetkin. I thought AJ's back foot work against Povetkin was pretty good, you know, and it's what won him the fight. When AJ was going forward against Povetkin, he was getting himself hurt. But when he started dropping that left hand and just being a bit more fluid, that's when he got the fight won. The one way says, all the money in the world and you choose Angel Fernandez must have been circumstantial. Well, we all know AJ's a weirdo. You know, this is a guy who, before the first Usyk fight, leaned over the ropes and asked Clifton Mitchell, who was doing security, how he thought he should approach the fight. I've never met AJ, but I've met and known people who have met him in a boxing context. And these were people who really didn't know much about boxing. And he said that AJ was asking them what they thought, you know, asking their opinion and all this kind of business about how he should box. And so very, very strange, Anthony Joshua. He doesn't appear to have any confidence in his own judgment, you know? He seems to outsource all of his thinking, you know, about boxing to other people. Very strange. Danny says AJ was very successful under McCracken. I just think if he fought a slicker style, he would have been chinned sooner. But again, was he successful because of McCracken, or was he successful despite McCracken? In my opinion, he was successful despite McCracken. I'm not saying McCracken didn't do anything for him, but I don't think he fulfilled his potential under McCracken at all. I think he could have been better because he was with McCracken during his peak years. So if anyone was going to get the best out of AJ, it's whichever trainer had him during his peak years, right? His peak years being his physical and mental prime. That's when McCracken had him. Do we think that Robert Garcia would have done worse with AJ if he had him during those years? You know, I don't. I think Garcia would have done better. Even somebody who had him fighting a little more fluidly, I think would have done better. My personal opinion. Danny says, because of McCracken, in my opinion, AJ has a robotic personality without the natural defensive instincts. But then going back to what I said about the Povetkin fight, if you go back and watch that performance, AJ didn't get control of the fight until he started fighting more fluidly, right? He came out on the front foot, meeting Povetkin in the middle of the ring, McCracken style, and he was getting hurt. Yeah? But as soon as he went on the back foot and dropped his left hand and started being more fluid, he got control of the fight and won. Depends on the opponent as well. You know, that is not going to work against every opponent. For some opponents, you're going to be better off being on the front foot. Jay Silver says, do you think he's like that because he started late in boxing? No, I don't. I think AJ is just like that because he's a weird person. There are loads of people that started late in boxing. Fabio Wardley started late in boxing, right? But Fabio Wardley isn't as unsure of himself and unsure of his own judgment as AJ is. Big up Kieran Malcolm for the super chat. He says, yes, Hatman, it wasn't Angel Fernandez style that AJ used against Povetkin. It was the fluid style taught by Joby Clayton, Ben Whitaker's old trainer. You know what, Kieran Malcolm, I have to big you up because you're absolutely bang on the money. You are correct. It was Joby Clayton. Thank you. It wasn't Angel Fernandez. That's right. I think he maybe started working with Fernandez a couple of fights later. You're right. Yeah, you're right. Come to think of it. Yes, it was Joby Clayton. Thank you, Kieran Malcolm. It was Joby Clayton. Trollsabad says, how do you think AJ would have done if he had Stewart, as in Manny Stewart? Here's the thing about Manny Stewart. Manny Stewart demanded that his fighters were gunslingers and risk takers. His fighters were always technically sound, but he demanded that they have a gunslinger mentality. And that's why he got so frustrated with Vladimir Klitschko, for example. He's always screaming at him in the corner for being too cautious, not letting his hands go enough. AJ was never as cautious as Vladimir, but he still would have been a bit too jittery and cautious, I think, for Manny Stewart's liking. Not that Manny Stewart wouldn't have trained him. I'm sure Manny Stewart would have done. Manny Stewart was all about his paper. How would AJ have done? I don't know whether Manny Stewart would have been the ideal trainer for him. But it would have been interesting, you know? And I'm saying all this because you look at the guys Manny Stewart had, his signature fighters like Tommy Hearns. Tommy Hearns had a weak chin. He was obviously a hellacious puncher with both hands, but particularly with the right. But Hearns had a massive heart. And despite suffering multiple knockout defeats, Hearns was never gun shy, you know? He got stopped by Sugar Ray Leonard. He would move up to 154, blast out Roberto Duran, you know? When he moved up to middleweight, he got knocked out by Iran Barkley. He would then move up to light heavyweight. He knocked out Dennis Andrews. He never got gun shy after getting chinned, Tommy Hearns. That was one of the great things about him. And that is what Manny Stewart expected from his fighters. Manny Stewart was very, very hard on his fighters. And his whole thing was, you know, even if you get chinned, I'm not accepting you being gun shy. Yeah, you need to still go out there and be the gunslinger. Big up the size game. He says AJ would have done well with Adam Booth. Maybe, I don't know. It's a very, very different style for, I'm not sure if the Adam Booth style works with a guy as big as AJ, you know? I'm not sure it works with someone that size. Might work better with a smaller, more nimble heavyweight. I always felt that, yeah, the Klitschko setup would have been good for, I'm talking about the post Manny Stewart Klitschko setup with Jonathan Banks and James Ali Bashir. I think that would have worked well for AJ, personally. Yeah, I agree with Chainsaw. Jonathan Banks and James Ali Bashir training AJ, I think, would have been a good shout. Because they know how to protect a vulnerable heavyweight in terms of stylistically, you know? They did it with Vladimir. The one way says Sugar Hill doesn't even have a gym, doesn't he? I'm sure the Kronk still exists. It's not the original Kronk. They've moved it to a different part of Detroit. But last I checked, the Kronk still exists. Sugar Hill Stewart lost control of the Kronk? Is that what it is? Big up Matt for the super chat. He says, I wish Boots trained with either Freddie Roach or Robert Garcia. He needs defense with his offense improved. Bozy doesn't know how to do that. I don't think Freddie Roach is the guy to go to for defense personally. Robert Garcia is a bit more shrewd defensively. I think one of those old Philly trainers would have been good for Boots Ennis, or Philly-based trainers, you know, or even Michigan-based trainers. Somebody like Pops Miller, I think he was based in Michigan. He was James Toney's original trainer, Pops Miller. Somebody like a Curtis Cokes. These are all old school guys who've passed away. Curtis Cokes. Fernie G says, and big up Matt for the super chat. In terms of people that are around now, a lot of those old school type trainers they're gone now, you know, passed away. I'm not as familiar with the newer trainers. Big up Harold Protagonist. Mark Hatch says AJ's too old to change his ways now. I think AJ's reflexes are more diminished than we realized, or more diminished than I realized prior to the Dubois fight. Because obviously he fought a Francis Ngannou who, for one, is not a boxer, and for two, is long in the tooth himself. And so AJ's reflexes looked pretty good against Ngannou, but it's Ngannou, you know? When he was in there against the heavyweight in his 20s, AJ's reflexes did not look good at all. Timing was totally off. Don't get it twisted. Dubois was forcing mistakes out of him by being hyper-aggressive and forcing AJ to rush his work. Ngannou wasn't able to apply that type of intense pressure. So AJ had a second or so more to see the openings and anticipate what Ngannou was doing and take advantage. Big up Matt for the super chat. He says, Bomac is good, but his tutorials are horrible. In fact, yeah, Bomac, but would Bomac be willing to train? I mean, I'm sure he would be if the price is right, but with Boots Ennis and Terence Crawford being potential rivals, could that really work out? I mean, maybe. But yeah, I do rate Bomac. You have to rate Bomac based upon the work he's done. JK says, I think Franklin is a nice test for Itauma. He's not an old guy, never been knocked out. His only 2 losses were by decision, where he gave an account of himself. It's a great test for Itauma at this point. Yeah, I don't necessarily see Franklin as a test for Itauma. I'm not trying to be pedantic here. I'm just saying the way I see it. I don't necessarily think he's a test, although he could be. You know, we'll find out on fight night. I just think he's a guy that is likely to give Itauma rounds and make himself awkward and hang around a little bit and sling a few shots back. But I fully expect Itauma to win. I'd be quite surprised if he didn't. Big up JK. Indeed, Samir, Bomac got Keyshawn on track to be somewhat like Bud. Yeah, I think it's like, as Danny said there, I think Franklin is a good milestone for Itauma. It's a good measuring stick to see where he's at. That's the way I see it. Rather than see it as a serious test for him, I see it as a good measuring stick, because Franklin is very, very tough. Like, he's physically tough. He can take a shot. He's mentally tough. He's got quite good defense. I'm not saying he's Alexander Usyk defensively, but he doesn't take that many clean shots. Wow, that's a very good shout, actually, Chainsaw. He says, Costamato with AJ, how would that have gone? I think AJ would have done better with Costamato than with most other trainers, because Costamato is really like a philosopher and a psychologist. You know, he was the kind of guy that liked to live with the fighter, that liked to know every aspect of the fighter's personality. And in doing so, he worked out how to give the fighter confidence, you know? Costamato would always, as I understand it, work on you psychologically before anything else. Recognize your psychological weaknesses and then go from there. That's certainly what he did with Mike Tyson. Yeah, he recognized what he needed psychologically and he said, okay, I need to give him this, 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 and this. Work on his mind first. Oh wow, big up Matt for the super chat. He says, Keyshawn versus Hitchens aimed for February 2026. Is that confirmed? Well, you say it's aimed, excuse me. That'd be a great fight. Richardson Hitchens, who threw Eddie Hearn under the bus. That was quite funny. Indeed, Chainsaw. Maybe if anyone could have sorted AJ's mind out, it would have been a Costamato. If any boxing trainer, that is, would have had the best chance, in my opinion, of sorting AJ's mind out, yeah, Cost would have been the guy. Fernie G says, I don't think AJ's ever been a fighter at heart, more of an athlete. You might be right, but he appeared to come across as a fighter against Dylan White in the fight they had all those years ago. He appeared to come across as a fighter in that one. Ali says, do you think Cuss would have allowed the stay humble, stay hungry PR? Yes. Costamato actually wanted Mike Tyson to have a very gentlemanly image, believe it or not. He wasn't a fan of like the bad boy image and all that type of business. He wanted Mike to have a very professional, gentlemanly image and be a beast in the ring, but outside the ring, be a gentleman. That's how Cuss wanted him to be. Joshua Hooker says, I still think AJ could beat most of the top 10. Personally, I disagree. Music Playlist says, who trained Larry Holmes? Would it have worked for AJ trying to have a jab-heavy style, focusing on fundamentals? Larry Holmes, for a long stretch of his career, was trained by Richie Giacchetti, an Italian-American trainer who actually later on worked with Mike Tyson for a couple fights. He worked with Mike Tyson for the Razor Ruddock fights. Was he with him for the Alex Stewart fight as well? And the Tillman fight? I forget. He also was in Tyson's corner for the Holyfield rematch. So yeah, Richie Giacchetti was Larry Holmes. I think his most long-term trainer was Richie Giacchetti. Danny says, the better question is, who can AJ beat in the top 10? Not many. I concur with Danny on this. The One Way says, sad reality is, it's like we enjoy seeing AJ come out and get whooped. Leave that man retire, damn. Well, I've been calling for him to retire ever since that Dubois loss. I said he should retire. But we can't force him, right? So if he insists on carrying on, then we're going to speculate about how he would do against whichever fighter's out there. Jake Isaac says, Don Charles would have made AJ undisputed. You see, the thing about fighters, not all of them, of course, but a lot of them, they don't really have many interests outside of boxing. Some of them dedicate themselves to boxing to such an extent that it becomes a total obsession. And it's literally the only focus they have in their lives. And that obsession leads them to in the case of an Anthony Joshua, fame and fortune. That's all he knows in terms of getting himself out of a rut, improving his life and whatever. All he knows how to do is box, right? That's what he turns to. That's what he's been turning to since he was in his early 20s or late teens, whatever it was when he started boxing. That has got him out of every problem he's been in. So he's been focused on that for all these years. And now it's no longer getting him out of the problems he was in. You know, so he doesn't know what else to do. A lot of fighters are like, they don't know what else to do. Shout out to Greg for the super chat. He says, would you take 100K to have an easy fight against the bum, but you walk out to Audie Harrison's rap tune and sing every word and proper give it beans? Yes. 100K, that'd probably just about do it. Why not? Against the bum? Yeah, I'll be laughing all the way to the bank. Shout out to Greg for the random question on the super chat. Danny says, Jared Anderson was similarly skilled as Itauma but got exposed once he fought a top 10. I disagree with that. I think Itauma is far more fundamentally sound than Anderson. Anderson always had this massive defensive flaw where he would lean back from punches with his feet stationary. Now, leaning back from punches, especially moving back in a straight line while leaning back, has always been a no-no, right, for boxing fundamentalists, for most trainers. But Muhammad Ali used to lean back from punches, but he'd move his feet at the same time as moving away. So you know, he'd lean back, but also be moving his feet away. Jared Anderson would have his feet planted to the canvas and just lean his upper body back in a straight line. I mean, that is just suicidal, bro. Suicidal. Itauma doesn't do that. Itauma is a lot more fundamentally sound than Anderson. Way more fundamentally sound. Much better footwork. Anderson, when he jumps in the pocket and starts unloading, he stays in the pocket. He's not like in and out, you know, waiting for your shot to come back, then jumping out the pocket, allow you to miss, then jump back in. But that's what Itauma does. Itauma's kind of a little bit of a Manny Pacquiao in that sense, right? He'll jump in the pocket, he'll let a couple shots go, he'll jump back out and wait for your counters to whiz by, then he'll jump back in. And he's doing this at speed. So that's far more sophisticated because he's switching between offense and defense in the middle of a combination. Jared Anderson just didn't do that anywhere near as effectively. So for me, no, Itauma's a lot more technically advanced than Anderson. Yes, I remember the photograph you're talking about, Jake. It was hilarious. Don Charles got his jaw broken by Hay. I think it was from that shot. Then he says, so you're picking Itauma to beat Anderson right now, 100%. Anderson appears to be traumatized. I mean, I would have given Anderson a much better shot prior to the Bakoli fight. Like the pre-Bakoli version of Anderson versus Itauma. That's a much more competitive fight, in my opinion, than the current version of Anderson. Anderson just seems totally traumatized by what happened to him against Bakoli. Totally traumatized. Jay Silver says, do you think AJ is a bit like Frank Bruno? No, I don't. I think AJ stylistically is very different to Bruno. I think he's better than Bruno overall. I'd say Bruno had a better jab than AJ. Probably a better chin than AJ. I mean, Bruno would get rattled, but he wouldn't go down. You know, he only ever went down in the Tyson the two Tyson fights. In the first fight, there was a flash knockdown in the first round, so it wasn't much of a knockdown. The only time he ever got properly put on his back, a heavy knockdown in any fight, was against Bone Crusher Smith. Because there was no heavy knockdowns that he suffered in the Tyson fights. He took a knee in the first Tyson fight and also in the second Tyson fight. He just went down on a knee. He never got like stretched out on his back. The only time that happened was against Bone Crusher Smith. Now you could say the same about AJ with the exception of the Dubois fight, right? But no, he also got laid out by Klitschko. He got up, but he got stretched out on his back in that fight too. Danny says, I'd happily bet you on that when I take Anderson. I would 100% take that. And I'd totally back Itauma to beat Anderson. I think the fact that Anderson hasn't fought again, he had one fight after Bakoli and then he's just gone missing. I think that tells you a lot about him psychologically, you know? Charlie says Bruno smashes AJ. I disagree. I think AJ is better than Frank Bruno. Bruno was, you know, loved by a certain generation. Maybe certain people could relate to Bruno more, but yeah, for me, just looking at it as objectively as I can, I think AJ was a much better fighter. Would Bruno have beaten Klitschko, even the version of Klitschko that AJ beat? I don't think so. Would Bruno have beaten Andy Ruiz? It's a tough fight. I'm not sure. Would Bruno have beaten Povetkin? Kieran Malcolm says, has Bruno taken a harder right hand than what AJ took against Klitschko? Probably comparable right hands, yeah. Probably comparable. Danny says, Anderson was punching Bakoli's heading outside of the knockdowns. Every time he got hurt, he was coming back with more. I don't know if Itauma could deal with that type of intensity and that type of fight. But Bakoli's there to be hit. Itauma's not there to be hit. That's the difference. And I just think that Itauma's way more defensively responsible than Anderson. Anderson's so reckless. I mean, if you want an example of Anderson against the southpaw, just look at the Charles Martin fight. Charles Martin, who got chinned by AJ in a couple of rounds, gave Anderson all he could handle and hurt him several times. You know? If Charles Martin at that age as a southpaw is giving Anderson that many issues, just imagine what Itauma's going to do. So for me, I think Itauma smokes Anderson, to be honest. I think he smokes him. Especially now, if it was the Anderson of the Bakoli fight, I think it's a lot more competitive. But the current, I mean, did you see Anderson's last fight? He looked terrible. He looked shell-shocked and disinterested. Anderson, from a psychological perspective, is a bit of a Danny Garcia, I think. You know, not Danny Garcia, excuse me, Ryan Garcia, excuse me. He's a bit of a Ryan Garcia, you know? He's like one of these new emo boxers. I don't mean he's an actual emo, but he's got kind of like an emo mentality. Do you know what I mean by that? He's like somebody that listens to, what's that rapper that died? Triple X Tentacion or whatever he was called. Yeah. Ryan Garcia gives off Triple X Tentacion vibes. And so does Jared Anderson. He's like young, tragic guys who are traumatized by everything, and it's just weird, man. Yeah, like emo rap. That's how Anderson comes across in his personality, like an emo rapper. Man's too sensitive for this game. Again, Ryan Garcia vibes. You gotta suck it up. Pause. You know what I mean? Danny says he's answered more questions than Itauma and is still young enough to come again. What questions has he answered? He's got heart, yeah, but ultimately he failed the test against Bakoli, didn't he? He got stopped. So there was a question asked about his chin, and he failed that. You know, that there was a test of his chin. He failed the chin test. He failed the defense test. He failed the strategy test. He was in there exchanging with Bakoli. He should have been sticking and moving. So he was tested more than Itauma's been tested, but he failed those tests. Yeah, he should be able to come again at that age, but his mind just don't seem right. That's the problem. It's like Ryan Garcia, right? Ryan Garcia just can't seem to get his mind right. Troubled. Indeed, Copezilla, it's like the new Batman. He was emo tragic. What's up with these tragic boxers? You know, this young generation of tragic boxers. What's that all about? I think Anderson's got a big heart. He did prove that. He passed the heart test against Bakoli. I'll give him that. He passed the heart test, yes. I'll agree with Danny on that. Anderson didn't go out, you know, he didn't go into his shell. He tried to fight back when he was under fire against Bakoli. He passed the heart test, yeah. Yeah, that's right, music playlist. I know exactly what you mean, and I swear that emo vibe is getting common in Black American guys for some reason. Yeah, I think it's like a subgenre of rap now. They've got like emo rap. And a lot of youngsters are into it. Which rapper did that song? All my friends are dead. Push me to the edge. Who's that? All my friends are dead. Somebody should be able to tell me that in the live chat. I'm an old man. I don't know who rapped that song. The one talking about all my friends are dead. That had weird emo rap vibes about it. Big up Andy for the super chat. He says, think of a fight that another 10 seconds of a round would have changed the outcome of the fight, thus changing history. Any top fights come to mind? Long-time follower, love the lives, top man. Big up Andy for the super chat every time, much appreciated, my bro. One that definitely comes to mind would be Meldrick Taylor against Julio Cesar Chavez. Meldrick Taylor was ahead in that fight on most people's scorecards, and he got himself in trouble and was stopped with something like 3 seconds left on the clock. Referee Richard Steele waved it off. So that was less than another 10 seconds. And that would have been Julio Cesar Chavez's first defeat. I forget what fight number that was for Julio Cesar Chavez, but he didn't lose until he was, I think, over 80 fights in. His first defeat was to Frankie Randall, AKA the Surgeon. So yeah, that would have changed the trajectory of boxing history and whatnot if Meldrick Taylor had just managed to hang on for a couple more seconds. That would have been a historic win. Might have changed the trajectory of his career, you know? Okay, it was Little Uzi Vert with the All My Friends Are Dead track. There you go. Little Uzi Vert. Malik says he lost at 89-0. There you go. So yeah, he was over 80 fights in before he lost to Frankie Randall. Frankie Randall was a good fighter back in the days. He was my older brother's favorite fighter for a while there. He was a big fan of Frankie Randall. Very well-schooled fighter was Frankie Randall. Sharp puncher, quick. Danny says, I think it was Iran Barkley who he KO'd. Who are you referring to? Who KO'd? Oh, Danny says, was it Duran who jumped off the canvas and landed a right to KO someone? No, he didn't KO Iran Barkley. That fight went a distance. And Duran was never down in that fight. Barkley was down. I think he was down in the 14th round. I think there was only one knockdown in the fight, and it was Barkley going down. I want to say it was the 14th round, because that was a 15-round fight. But Duran was never done. Duran was hurt several times against Barkley. He got hit with Barkley's massive left hook several times and somehow stood up to it. Bear in mind, Duran was in his late 30s at that point. Barkley was in his 20s. The size difference was massive. Duran was a natural lightweight. And he was fighting all the way up at middleweight against a massive middleweight, a puncher at that, the guy who chinned Tommy Hearns. And remember, Tommy Hearns had previously chinned Duran in 2 rounds. So that's just another example of how boxing is rock, paper, scissors. That was one of the best wins of Roberto Duran's career against Iran Barkley. It's a great fight, by the way. For anyone who ain't watched that. Great fight. Chris Ward says, Duran was the man, best lightweight of all time, in my opinion. Yeah, he's without a doubt on the short list. I mean, no question about it whatsoever. Abdi says, Shakur versus Tio, assuming it happens, who has everyone got? Interesting fight. Personally have Tio stopping him if he fights with a mature head. Yeah, we'll put that to the live chat. Let's get a show of hands. If Teofimo Lopez versus Shakur Stevenson happens, how do you guys see it going? Let's get your predictions. Personally, I see Shakur winning on points. How does the rest of the live chat see it? Lopez versus Stevenson, if that fight gets made. You know what? That's bang on, Malik. He says, I don't know why, but Iran Barkley always gives me Biz Markie type vibes. Yeah, Iran Barkley blatantly looks like Biz Markie in the face. Just a slimmer, well, Iran Barkley's kind of fat now, but during his career, he was like a in-shape version of Biz Markie. Chris Wood says, I got Tio winning. Fernie G's got Shakur. Someone else got Shakur by decision, easy work. Afro Jam, Shakur all day. Chris Ward says Tio. Derek Clark, Shakur. Jazz says Shakur by stoppage. Wow, that's a big call. That's a big prediction. Abdi says, I feel Tio would test Shakur's chin. Music playlist says Shakur on points, but many people will complain that Tio should have got the win because Shakur was boring. Yeah, I just look at Tio's form against southpaws, slick southpaws, and he tends to struggle. Josh Taylor's not a slick southpaw, okay? Sandor Martin's more like a slick southpaw. Who is the other switch hitter that Tio was fortunate to get a decision over? I forget the guy's name now. Latino guy. So yeah, I reckon Shakur takes it on points. Afro Jam says Tio will lose mentally before he steps in the ring if he don't duck. Casa says Shakur is technically superior. It will probably show. Abdi says, but Tio does blow hot and cold. Really turns up for big fights. Crazy guy. Jermaine Ortiz, thank you. Yes. I'm struggling to pronounce your username. Is it Be the Sly One. Excuse me. Be the Sly One, says Jermaine Ortiz. Thank you, Be the Sly One. There you go, Afro Jam. Sandor Martin and Jermaine Ortiz. Tio struggled against both those guys. I don't like the way he looks against slick southpaws. Andy says, trying to super chat but not working unless $9.99? Damn. I apologize on behalf of YouTube. Not that I've got anything to do with YouTube. Other people have super chatted for far less. I'm not sure why you're getting that problem. People do get problems with super chatting, and I've got no idea why. I wish I could tell you something. I wish I could tell you what's going on there. I've got no idea. What type of insect has just crawled on me here? Hang on. Okay, Danny's saying the fight he was thinking of was Chavez versus Roger Mayweather. Big up Chili Beef in the chat. Big up AJ, he says the eye transplant scene was mad in Minority Report when he eats that moldy sandwich recovering. Yeah, that was nasty. And also drink some moldy milk. The milk is like green because it's that off. Remember that part? Yeah, that's messed up. And it's got that Swedish actor in it who's so creepy. I don't know what the name is of that Swedish actor, but he's very, very good at playing creepy characters. He was also in the game and also the movie Until Dawn. He was in the HBO, was it HBO series Prison Break as well? That weird Swedish actor. Anyone know his name? Okay, Desi is predicting that Itauma is going to box Franklin's head off and make him quit between rounds 5 and 7. Interesting call. Abdi says, ain't it crazy how Kambosos boxed so well and counterpunched against Tio? Styles really do make fights. Styles make fights, and also Tio and his dad was so arrogant going into that fight. They thought that Kambosos was like a 2-round blowout. Some knockover job. They gave him no respect whatsoever. And that really showed itself in the instructions that Tio's dad was giving to his son in the corner. He had no technical or strategic instructions at all. All he was screaming is just go out there and knock him out, knock him out. Like, he was saying that from early in the fight. if it was the 12th round or 10th round or 11th round and you're a mile behind on the cards and you've tried everything else, then yeah, you're going to tell your guy, go out there and knock him out. But it was like round 3, 4, and he was screaming at him in the corner, knock this bum out, knock him out. Like, he needed better instruction than that. And to me, that was indicative of how ill-prepared Tio Lopez and his dad were for that fight. Afro Jam says Prison Break or Oz. As in the Swedish actor, he was definitely in Prison Break. As far as which is better, Oz is way better than Prison Break. Oz, for one, is far more realistic than Prison Break. Prison Break was kind of like a prison drama that was made for teenage boys. Do you know what I mean? Whereas Oz was far more of a grown-up show. Hilarious at times, Oz, but yeah, much more for adults. Prison Break was like geared towards teenage boys or something. Big up Adam for the super chat. He says, do you reckon Ditchko, who fought Franklin, would have been a better opponent or an unnecessary risk at this stage of Itauma's development? I think Ditchko would be a much more dangerous opponent for Itauma offensively than Jermaine Franklin. I don't think, or I suspect anyway, Ditchko's not as durable as Franklin. And so I think that Ditchko's got a better chance of winning, would have a better chance of winning against Itauma than Franklin. But Franklin's got a better chance of lasting rounds and going a distance, you know? If that makes sense. So shout out to Adam for the super chat. But yeah, maybe that's why Ditchko didn't get the decision, even though he clearly deserved it. Perhaps the organizers felt that he'd be a bit too much of a risk for Itauma. So let's get Franklin in there against him, who, again, is tough and can maybe take him rounds, but isn't going to ask him the questions from an offensive perspective or from a defensive perspective. If you're looking at Itauma, you know, he's not going to test Itauma's defense to the same extent as an Ivan Ditchko might. Bear in mind, Ditchko was a superb amateur. One of the top super heavyweights in the amateur code for years and beat a lot of very good fighters. So he would have seen people similar to Itauma many times in the amateurs, Ivan Ditchko, many times. Debyaka says, I rewatched Ditchko versus Franklin, wasn't a robbery at all. I disagree. I think it was a robbery. I think the commentators were far too generous towards Franklin. From what I remember, I thought it was a flat-out robbery. They were literally silent. There will be times when Ditchko lands 3-4 shots on Franklin and the commentators wouldn't even say anything about it. And then Franklin would land like a glancing overhand right. Oh, Franklin would have, I'd be like, what? Tony S says Ditchko was some strange dimensions. The man's 6'9" with a 77-inch reach. Definition of T-Rex arms. Well, somebody on the live stream that I did, commentating on that fight, said that Ditchko looks like Vitaly Klitschko with a bald head, and he does. Because Vitaly Klitschko was similar dimensions. Very tall, about 6'7", but a 78-inch reach. So short arms for his height. Vitaly Klitschko. Was it Danny? It might have been Danny that said Ditchko looks like Vitaly with a bald head. I think it was Danny, actually. He's bang on. Literally Vitaly Klitschko with a bald head. Yeah, I disagree with that, Deb York. I don't think Franklin did sweep the second half of the fight. Did Ditchko have 2-point deductions? I think Franklin maybe picked up a couple rounds in the second half of the fight. I don't think he swept it at all, in my opinion. Jazz says Franklin lacks power, Itauma won't be chin tested. I agree. Unless Itauma's got a really poor chin, then I'm not expecting to see him have any issues if he does get clipped. Big up Andy for the super chat. He says, using today's boxers, list your dream card. Money no object in the following weights: middleweight, super middleweight, light heavyweight, cruiser, heavy. And who would you pick in those in the chosen fights? Big up Andy. That's a great question. Okay, let's attack this. Middleweight. I'm going to cheat a little bit here with middleweight, because I'm going to say Terence Crawford, who hasn't fought at 160, versus Janabek Alim-Kanuli. So that's one of the fights I'll go for. Cheating a bit because, you know, Crawford's at super middleweight. He's not a middleweight. So you'll have to forgive me on that. But yeah, Janabek versus Terence Crawford at 160. At super middleweight, I'll go... Let me bring up the super middleweight rankings to refresh my memory who's up there at 168. Super middleweight, I'll go... let's see. Hamza Shiraz versus Diego Pacheco. Yeah, I'll go Hamza Shiraz versus Diego Pacheco at 168. At light heavyweight, I'll go... Let's see here. I'll go David Benavidez versus Dimitri Bivol. That'll be my light heavyweight fight. Cruiserweight would be, and some people are going to say this is, well, cruiserweight, I want to say Opataya versus Ramirez. I'll go Opataya versus Ramirez, but an honorable mention, and again, some people might think this is totally crazy, but I do have quite high hopes for the person I'm about to mention. But right now, it'll be Opataya versus Ramirez. But as an honorable mention, I'm just going to say it. Opataya versus Pat Brown. Shoot me down in the comments all you want. But Pat Brown is ferocious, bro. I've got high hopes for Pat Brown, to be honest, in the cruiserweight division. If he can take a shot, as Eddie Hearn claims he can, then I think Pat Brown could be a new star of British boxing. You know, he's got all the ingredients. And for heavyweight, I would go... It's not going to be anyone against Usyk, because I don't think anyone's ready for him right now. I'm going to say... I want to say Itauma versus Wardley, or Daniel Dubois versus Wardley. Itauma versus Wardley or Dubois versus Wardley would be great fights. Or even Dubois versus Bakoli. God, there are just so many possibilities. I apologize for giving multiple answers per question. But much respect to Andy for the super chat. Much appreciated. Danny says, will you be shocked if Itauma gets chinned? I will be quite shocked, yes, if Itauma gets chinned by Franklin. See, I always felt that Itauma was very sure to beat Dillian Whyte. I didn't give Dillian Whyte much of a chance in that fight, other than the puncher's chance. And the puncher's chance is still a chance, right? Franklin, in my mind, doesn't even have a puncher's chance. I think he lasts a lot longer than Dillian Whyte because he's got a chin and he's got a better defense and he's fresher. But I just don't see how he wins. The guy doesn't have the kind of power that I suspect would be necessary to get rid of Itauma, unless Itauma suffers like a bad cut or a broken hand or something, and or is handicapped in some way. I just don't see how Franklin wins the fight. So yeah, I'd be shocked. Okay, Danny said, sorry, not against Franklin, I mean altogether. If Itauma gets chinned by someone, no, I won't be shocked at all. Lennox Lewis got chinned. Mike Tyson got chinned. You know, Evander Holyfield got chinned. Many of the Joe Louis got chinned. Most of the greatest heavyweights of all time have got chinned at some point. So, no, if Itauma gets chinned at some stage of his career, it won't be a shock to me at all. Mora's man says Pat Brown is not a great boxing name. I agree, it's a bit plain, isn't it? It doesn't have a ring to it like Tyson Fury, Anthony Joshua, Deontay Wilder, Pat Brown. Yeah, it doesn't have a ring to it, but I don't know, man. Again, to quote Jim Watt, Pat Brown's just got a solid look about him to me. When I look at his, like, a lot of this stuff is me assessing him subconsciously based upon other fighters I've seen over the years. And Pat Brown just physically looks solid. He's got like quite a large head relative to his body. He just looks like someone that can probably take a shot. And he puts his punches together very well. He's like fiery, he's vicious when he lets the combinations go. He loves going to the body, particularly with the left hook. I think Eddie Hearn might actually have something with Pat Brown. I think he might actually have something. For the first time in a very long time, I think he might actually have something there. Big up the place. Wart says Amir Khan didn't live up to his name. What does Amir Khan mean? Explain that one. Because Americans, the way they pronounce Amir Khan, they say Amir Khan, which phonetically is the same as saying Amir Khan, right? If you say it in an American accent, Amir Khan, sounds like you're saying he is a mere con, like a con artist. So if you say it in an American accent, in some people's opinion, he did live up to his name. Oh, King Khan, okay. That's right, yes. Amir means prince in Arabic. Thank you for reminding me of that. Yeah, I did actually know that, but it slipped my mind, yeah. Amir is a prince in Arabic, that's correct. I believe the surname Khan harkens back to the time of Genghis Khan, right? Because Genghis Khan conquered that part of Asia, didn't he? Pakistan and all that. or northern Pakistan, maybe. I'm pretty sure that surname goes back to Genghis Khan. Correct me if I'm wrong. Casa says Khan was brilliant for British boxing. He was too. Andy says best boxing name of all time. Hard to say the best of all time, but I can tell you some of my favorites. Iron Mike was a great name. Yeah, Iron Mike Tyson just summed him up perfectly. You know, Iron Mike Tyson. So Iron Mike is one of them. The Real Deal of Evander Holyfield. I actually give Luke Partridge credit for the Gypsy King. I think the Gypsy King is a great nickname. There are many other nicknames, but I don't know whether I put them up there as among the best nicknames. Yeah, Ali was called the Greatest. Is that such an amazing nickname? I don't think so. Tommy Hearns was called the Hitman and also the Motor City Cobra. Those names are cool. James Lights Out Tony, it's cool, but Hands of Stone, that's probably up there. Roberto Duran, Hands of Stone, one of the better ones. The Hands of Stone, Roberto Duran. Yeah, the Eastern Assassin, that's Larry Holmes. Michael Thompson says, Lennox the Pugilist Specialist. I didn't think that was a great nickname. He gave that name to himself. Nobody ever called him that. He just used to say it in interviews and whatever. So for me, that wasn't no great nickname. Smoking Joe Frazier's an iconic one. Desi says Errol the Truth Spence. Well, the original Truth, or one decades before Errol Spence, was Carl Williams. Carl the Truth Williams. Moroz Man says Hands of Stone is the greatest one, to be fair. Body Snatcher was Mike McCallum. Cinderella Man was what was the Cinderella Man called? What was his name now? What was Cinderella Man called? Max Bear. The Dark Destroyer, Nigel Benn. That was a good nickname. Danny says the Klitschko's sounded like Frankenstein's weapons. That's right. One of the Klitschko's was called Dr. Eisenfaust, which means Dr. Iron Fist in German. And the other one was Dr. Steelhammer. Excuse me, James Braddock, not Max Bear. That's right, James J. Braddock. He was the Cinderella Man, not Max Bear. Thank you for correcting me. Yeah, James J. Braddock. Dr. Steelhammer and Dr. Iron Fist. Yeah, Razor Ruddock was decent. And for those who don't know, Razor Ruddock, the boxer, had his name before the footballer. The footballer took his name from Razor Ruddock, the boxer. The one where he says Ricky the Hitman Hatton is a great one. Well, he took that from Tommy Hearns, right? Tommy Hearns was the original Hitman. Tommy the Hitman Hearns. And it suited Tommy Hearns better because he was a one-punch knockout specialist. Like a hitman taking you out with one shot. Big Bang Jang. Yeah, that's a good one for Bance. Nathan, there you go. Nathan says $1 million crawler. The original body snatcher was Mike McCallum, Danny, who was also Jamaican. That's where Dylan White got it from. Mike McCallum far better than Dylan White ever was. Big up Ocean Blue. Yeah, Iron Mike has got to be up there, Danny. Totally agree with that. Iron Mike Tyson. There's something primeval about it, you know? And it just works so well with his style and with his persona and everything. Iron Mike Tyson. Crazy. Iron Mike. Literally a man made of iron. That's how hard he was. Pause. Iron Mike. Yeah, Money Mayweather wasn't bad. Pretty Boy Floyd, Money May. Yeah, cool names. Pac-Man, I guess, is pretty cool. You know, like the video game Pac-Man. Any other nicknames people can think of that were good back in the days, or even currently? Mexican Monster? That's average to me. Danny says, Anthony Joshua has 2 first names. Yeah, he's got a first name as a surname. That was actually a tradition for, not that Anthony Joshua's got anything to do with this, but that was actually a tradition for coal miners in the northeast of England. Did you know that? I think they would give their firstborn son a surname as his first name. So it's kind of the other way around. Rather than 2 first names, you'd have a lot of coal miners' sons in the northeast having 2 surnames. An example of it would be, what was that guy called now? Robson something. What's the guy called? That Geordie actor guy that also used to do a fishing program. What was his name? Big up Swaggins. He says, Daniel Triple Downs Dubois. Shots fired. Yeah, Danny. Yeah, that was a tradition in the northeast. They would give, like coal miners would give the firstborn son a surname as their first name. Robson Green, thank you, MC. Yeah, he's an example of it. In fact, I think that might be the guy that I heard it from, that I first heard it from, that tradition. In the northeast, when you're a coal miner's son, they give you a surname as your first name. Yeah, Robson Green, and that's an example. Man's first name is Robson. MC says the Raging Bull is a crazy nickname. It's a good nickname, Jake LaMotta. Then you had Oliver McCall's nickname, which was the Atomic Bull. And that was just bizarre. The Atomic Bull. I remember somebody describing Oliver McCall's defense of his WBC title against Larry Holmes as Atomic Bull-ish. One of the boxing writers described it that way. Atomic Bull Atomic Bull S-H-I-T. That was like the headline or something in one of the articles. I think Moses-Itauma, even though his first name is actually Enrique, is a very strong boxing name. And, you know, you can see the way that they'll play on that name. Is Moses-Itauma going to lead the heavyweight division to the promised land? You know, or is he going to make it to the promised land in the heavyweight? You can see the play on words that they'll use. Michael second to none. How about Nick the Wrecking Bull? Nick the Wrecking Bull. Not promising land, the promised land. It's from the Bible. Moses in the Bible leads the Israelites to the promised land. So you can see how, you know, content creators, boxing writers and so on will be formulating their headlines to that effect, you know. Is Moses the man to lead the heavyweights to the promised land? Something like that. Yeah, the Haymaker was decent. That's a decent nickname. The one way says, nah, Hatman, that one was dead. It's not a nickname. We're talking about headlines in articles and video titles, and it's not dead at all. It makes perfect sense that people would use Moses, right, just like he was in the Bible, and play on that, as in taking the heavyweight division to the promised land. It's not dead at all. It's literally exactly what will be happening with that name. In fact, I'm sure they've already done it. I'm sure there's already been articles where they're talking about Moses leading the heavyweights to the promised land. Sergio Maravilla. Yeah. Yeah, St. George is good. St. George Groves, can't argue with that one. Hassim the Rock, that was okay. David Tour was the Terminator. That's a bit weak. Corey Sanders was the Sniper. Prince Nassim. That was cool, I guess. Yeah, that was a terrible one. O'Neal Give 'em Hell Bell. That was a terrible nickname. Is he dead now? I think O'Neal Bell's dead, right? Did he pass away some years ago? Tourminator, that's right. That was one of Tua's other names, the Tourminator. Manasseh Mauler was Jack Dempsey. Let's not talk about the GWOAT. Captain Hook, yeah. That one was cheesy as hell. Marco Captain Hook. Juggernaut, okay. Adrian the Problem Broner, or About Billions. I actually think that Richard Riakpor's nickname is pretty good. The Night Train. That's a pretty good nickname to me. The Night Train. Oh, excuse me, the Midnight Train. Is it the Night Train or the Midnight Train? I think it's the Midnight Train, isn't it? That sounds even better, actually. Riakpor is the Midnight Train. Yeah, it sounds like a nickname from the 80s. The Midnight Train. I think Zab Judah's name was just Super Zab. Super Zab Judah. Yeah, I think it was just Super Zab Judah. That's right. The one where he says, or an 80s blue film. Yeah, it actually sounds like an 80s blue film. The Midnight Train. Either an 80s blue film or an 80s horror. Like a B movie. A B horror movie from the 80s, The Midnight Train. Trinidad's was Tito. Felix Trinidad was Tito Trinidad. Then you had Ricardo Lopez, whose nickname was Finito. Used to call him Finito Lopez. And we all know what finito means, right? Finished. Finito Lopez. Because his opponents were finished. Of course, Finito Lopez, one of the greatest Mexican fighters of all time. Retired undefeated. What was Antonio Margarito's nickname? Yeah, Golden Boy was a good nickname for Oscar De La Hoya. Obviously the gold medal. Yeah, Canelo's a great name. Anyone remember Margarito's nickname? The Tijuana Tornado, is that what his nickname was? That's not a very good nickname. The Tijuana Tornado, nah. He needed to make more of an effort with that one. Someone says the hands are plaster. This is not a boxing nickname, but I always thought that the rapper Beanie Siegel had a great nickname. His nickname was the Broadway Bull or the Broad Street Bully. If anyone who knows about old school 90s and early 2000s hip hop rap, the Broad Street Bully, I thought was a great name for a rapper. Beanie Siegel, the Broad Street Bully. Shout out to Andy for the super chat. He says, question to Hatman in the chat. Best entrance music to hype you up. Goosebumps, atmosphere, everything. Mine was always Eubank Jr. and Senior. Hits different. Also, best ring walk to watch live. To the chat and to Hatman. What do you guys think? To what Andy's asking there. Best ring entrance music and best ring walk to watch live. What do you guys reckon? I'm going to say Eubank absolutely was simply the best. But also, Nigel Benn was fantastic. It would send chills up my spine when the Big Ben chimes would go off before Nigel Benn would come out to fight. He didn't always use the same music. He used loads of different songs, right? Various different songs to come out to, but he'd always have the Big Ben chimes, and that'd give me goosebumps, bro. With Nigel Ben, when the chimes of Big Ben would go off, I'd always get goosebumps for that. Yeah, Kel Brook, All of the Lights, I think that was a great song. I always liked George Grove's Spitfire by The Prodigy. Yeah, I thought that Vladimir Klitschko had a good tune to come out to, which was by the Red Hot Chili Peppers. Yeah, Nigel Ben came out to Dangerous, but he came out to loads of other songs as well. There was a time when Nigel Ben was actually a DJ, like an active DJ during his boxing career. So he used to come out to all sorts of dance music and stuff like that. But he'd always play the chimes of Big Ben first before he came out. Big up Andy for the super chat. But yeah, for me, like, Eubank Sr., Nigel Ben had both great entrances. Goosebumps all over the place. George Groves with Spitfire. Kel Brook with All of the Lights. And even though I'm not familiar with the music, I always like Canelo's entrances, to be honest. I love the mariachi music. Love all that traditional Mexican stuff. Copezilla says, have you seen Predator Badlands yet? Yes, I have, and it's trash. Sorry to say. It's like they remade Predator for children. It's trash. Danny says Canelo is part Irish. Is that right? Believe it or not, the Irish, up until fairly recently, were not known for red hair. It was more so the Scottish. The Irish were actually known for being dark-haired, more dark-haired than the English. If you look it up in old history books and stuff like that, in letters of the time in the 1800s and whatnot, when the Irish started entering America, yeah, most Irish were described as brown hair, brown eyes, and just being generally more Mediterranean looking than English people. The red hair thing in Ireland is nowhere near as common as it is in Scotland. Well, there might have been Irish Americans that joined the Mexican army to fight against the US, but that doesn't mean that Canelo's got some Irish blood in him, nor does it mean that if he does have Irish blood in him, that they had red hair. So, I mean, it's possible, of course, but he's certainly got a lot of European in him, without a shadow of a doubt. He's obviously not a pure-blooded native of Mexico, and that's very obvious. Ali says, jet black hair, it was them and Southern Italians too. Yeah, Irish were known for being, you know, as white people go, dark complected. Usually, typically brown eyes, brown hair, and all that. So I'm not quite sure where the red hair thing came from. As in Irish people having that stereotypical red hair, because again, in centuries gone by, they weren't known for that. That was a Scottish thing. The Scots were always known for having the red hair. And I think even now, red hair is far more prevalent in Scotland than it is in Ireland. Tony says, I'm surprised Predator Badlands has good reviews on IMDb and Rotten Tomatoes. I'm not surprised because the media is all bought and paid for, you know? You watch the movie for yourself, you'll see that it is cheesy. I mean, unbelievably cheesy. It's literally, it has a similar tone to the first two Star Wars prequels. It's that childish, slapstick, you know, Jar Jar Binks type characters. It's terrible. Honestly, Prey was a good Predator movie. Yeah, I really liked Prey, which was directed by the same guy, apparently. So why on earth that guy chose to give Predator Badlands this childish tone, I got no idea. Yeah, Jar Jar Binks was a waste man. Big up KB. Hold tight, Deb Yaka. Catch you on the next one, my bro. Andy says, biggest and maddest brawl in the ring with teams. Well, the Riddick Bowe Andrew Gallotta first fight, the brawl between their two teams has got to be up there. That was crazy. There you go. Afro Jam comments with some history, which makes sense. He says the Scots-Irish are an ethnicity that were created when the British government shipped Scottish Protestants to Ireland to change the demography. Makes sense? Maybe that's where the red hair thing came from then. From the Scots-Irish. Because as I say, prior to that, the Irish were always known for having like dark hair. Like the Furies, for example. The Furies would be the typical look the Irish people had for many centuries. They look more like that. Just like the Furies look. And even most, you know, travelers, the majority of them that I've seen, Irish travelers, they've got dark hair, dark eyes, and all that. Anyway, peeps, gonna wrap this one up. I'd like to thank each and every one of you for joining me in the conversation as always. In fact, before I go, just want to answer Andy's last question. He says, which current boxer would you imagine being an ancient warrior, badass in the past life? In a way, he'd be some kind of samurai warrior, right? In a way, would be some kind of samurai warrior. Who else can I pick? Pat Brown probably would have been some type of Anglo-Saxon warrior. Turbiev, he would have been some kind of warrior out there in the Caucasus. Yeah, for sure. Jayopataya, of course. He's the main one. Jayopataya, a Samoan warrior, without a shadow of a doubt, doing the hacker and everything. 100% Jayopataya. Yeah, he above all the others I've mentioned, he would have been a warrior. Jayopataya. Jayopataya, bro. Them eyes, crazy. Crazy. His whole demeanor and everything, Jayopataya, he's a warrior. Big up Adam for the super chat. He says, Prime Povetkin versus Caballero. That's a very good fight. I'm going... God, that's such a tough fight. I'm going to go Prime Povetkin. Even though he had not the greatest stamina, I think he was technically a bit better, an underrated puncher. And he would have fought people like Caballero plenty of times in the amateurs. So I'm going to go Prime Povetkin just over Caballero. Big up Adam Fawkes for the super chat. Big up Matt for the super chat. He says, Queensbury need to work on these mid undercards. Yeah, but to be fair, Matt, this fight is not pay-per-view. So a non-pay-per-view card doesn't have to be that great. It would be nice if it was, but you know, it's non-pay-per-view. It's included in the subscription cost, so I can't take too much issue with it. So yeah, gonna wrap this one up. I'd like to shout out each and every one of you for joining the conversation. A special shout out to those who donated via Super Chat. They were Craig, Matt Borgeson, Tommy Gov, Mateo, Ben Odom, Gaz, James Clifford, Kieran Malcolm, The Size Game, Greg, Andy, of course, big up Andy, Adam Fawkes, Swaggins. Yes, so special shout out to those who donated via Super Chat. Until next time, take care, be good, and I'll catch you on the other side. I'm out.